What's going on, my friends? I have been smoking weed for a little over 10 years. I've been what I would consider to be a stoner. Many of my friends would disagree with me, but I was recently diagnosed with ADHD, though. As I become more and more aware of what the symptoms are, I've had ADHD since as long as I can remember. Back in grade school, I remember being like 7 years old, 8 years old, completely unable to focus on anything, totally in my own world, always drawing all over my schoolwork. I had multiple teachers tell me I was an idiot. I have a very specific memory of a teacher calling me the R word. And I never really felt like I belonged in academia, at least, well, grade school academics, but really had much of a place in the world in general. Now, the point of this video is not to rant and rave about ADHD, but I'm sure many of you watching this video can relate to feeling out of place, feeling unable to focus, feeling like you're always in your imagination and always looking for things to fulfill that deep curiosity that you have, or really just that deep sense of inability to grasp what is in front of you, right? There's so many things going on. There's so many things grasping at your attention. And inevitably you're going to be curious and want to explore those things. But the point of this video is really to talk about the way that cannabis affected me as a person with ADHD. Now, I am by no means an expert in the brain science. And at this point, today is day 3, totally sober off weed, but on a longer form journey that I've been on over the last few months of trying to mitigate. It's been a great journey, and connecting with all of you here on YouTube has been phenomenal, and I'm so grateful. And if you find that you're looking for a community of people that are not masters, right? That you're not going to be kicked out of the group because you're high, like the R trees or the R leaves, pardon me, Discord, right? Of people trying to kick cannabis that have all of these rules, right? If you're looking for a group like that, link to the Discord below. But I want to talk in this video about the way that weed's affected me, and perhaps we'll get into things that I see in other people that have a lot of cognitive dissonance. Now, like I said, I'm by no means an expert in the brain chemistry, but I can give you the absolute basics, which is that, cannabis does in fact interact with your dopaminergic system, right? And as a person with ADHD, you are primed for things that provide you huge dopamine feedback. You're going to see all through my comments people that are, projecting all this cope of like, you can't be addicted to weed, or it's like some bullshit about how it's a brain high or a body high. Look, if that's where you're at, this video is not for you. I don't think that you've been willing to come to the terms of where you're at and what cannabis actually is, and that's cool. This is probably just not something that you're ready to see. But I wanted to really dive into the way that weed is perfect for somebody with ADHD, right? Your brain, I can't remember the exact part of your brain that it's called, the anterior something cortex, but there's a great doctor who discusses ADHD named Dr. Edward Hallwell, who explains that your brain on ADHD is something like a Ferrari engine, but all you have are bicycle brakes. But the reality is, the only reason that your brain feels like a Ferrari engine with no brakes is because you just don't have the brakes, right? You just do not have as much development in this particular cortex that allows you to ruminate on particular thoughts, right? Your thoughts are all over the place. You just do not have that inhibitory aspect of your brain that allows you really to focus, right? Now, cannabis is perfect because it slows you down, right? And it also, at the same time, feeds that need for dopamine that you have. You have fewer dopamine receptors in your brain as a person with ADHD, but what that means is that you are far more apt towards things that provide you quick releases of dopamine. Drugs are perfect, right? And so you might find that where something like video games, porn, pot, right? These things might provide the average person a relative degree of pleasure. They provide you a massive degree of pleasure. And this is what I found when I first started smoking, consistently around 16, 17, 18, is that the way that weed made me feel was, anxious, paranoid, right? But at the same time, grounded and present and more full of life than I'd ever felt before. The problem really is, though, as time goes on, you need more and more and more of it. And this is why I find that when people tell me you can't be addicted to weed, like the first thing that I wonder is, have you ever smoked weed? Like, have you ever actually consumed cannabis? Because the craving for it, once you've used it, for me, it was almost immediate. It was so phenomenal. It felt so fulfilling that I felt like automatically I just knew I was a person who was going to be smoking on a regular basis. Over time, the issue becomes that you need more and more and more of it, right? The high wears off, and I'm sure that this is the same for a lot of people. I'm sure, whether or not you have ADHD, you can kind of relate to the same point that, of course, your tolerance builds, but it's deeper than that, right? It's a need not just for the cannabis, it's the need not just for the high, but it's the need for the state that it puts your brain in, the comfort. And so for me, I felt that I was being transported to, a fairy tale world at first. But over time, it felt like it was this thing that brought me to a state of, well, let's just call it homeostasis, right? Of balance, of peace. And I needed to consume more of it to get to that same place. My creativity was through the roof. Absolutely. I mean, I definitely felt like I was far more creative. I definitely felt like I was far more capable. But I also felt hindered, right? I also felt like this was a limitation that brought me into an introverted space that perhaps I needed, but then I couldn't really escape once I arrived there. I am now 28 years old, and I'm now, in this state where I'm aware of the way that it's affected me, both the positives, but, predominantly the negatives, which is bringing me to a place where I'm, going out of my way to mitigate. But what I'm finding is that now it's difficult to manage my emotions, right? Now it's difficult to manage impulsivity because I was so used to using that numbing process as my automatic problem-solving mechanism. And so I'm kind of struggling with where to go from here. So I think between, 18 and 20, it was this kind of magical experience. It gave me that sense that I was an edgy person, right, culturally. But more than anything, it was giving me the ability to really balance my thoughts and to calm my mind and become clear and focused on what it is that I wanted to do, to create, to experience, to think. And then I would say between 23, right, 26, this was where the repetition, the habituality, the need for it to really rely on is that's where that developed, right? And I realized during that time that the struggle with simply sitting with my thoughts, right? Simply sitting with my emotions, being able to channel that into personal growth was almost non-existent because I had this massive, dopamine feedback system that was external from me. I didn't need any kind of accomplishment. I didn't need any kind of, going out and solving challenges or going out and having some kind of epic experience, right? The experience was right there in the joint, in the bowl, in the blunt, whatever it was. And so I started to really build connection with that. Now, like I said, over time, it feels like you just need more and more and more. And for those of you that have been, in my community in the last few days, you've probably connected with a lot of people that share that same sentiment, right? It starts as a weekend thing, then becomes an evening thing. And then eventually it's something that you're doing throughout the day and really all day. Now, I have a buddy who's always telling me, like, you're not actually a smoker. You never actually were a smoker. And these are all kind of like these egoic bullshit ass projections that people that want to use cannabis as some kind of mark of like what makes a person cool or gangster or whatever it is. But I would say that perhaps lucky or just by chance, I never was a person who smoked like all day, every day. But even smoking 3 times a day, in the morning, in the afternoon, twice in the evening, these things created a pattern of requirement, right, for that dopamine feedback. And then, like I said, you need more and more to the point where it's like you're not smoking to get high. You're just smoking because you need to feel normal, right? And the weed is something that you have used, maybe because it actually works that way for ADHD, to bring you into a place where you feel normal. The problem then becomes, like I've said a million times already in this exact video, you become dependent on it. So I think back to, what it was that really hooked me when I was younger was that sense of creativity and real ability to be present with my thoughts. Now, of course, it's chaotic, right? It's chaotic to feel anxious and paranoid and all these things. But for me, I often felt like it physicalized the anxiety that I was already feeling by being a person who really struggled with being present, right? I don't think it's a bad thing to be, a person who daydreams. I don't think it's a bad thing to be a kid who writes on their schoolwork. And the reality is that, at least for me, right, the American education system in public school that I've went through was not one that was really capable of fostering the mind of a person like myself. Like I said, I really have predominantly bad memories of teachers up until at least high school, where I had the first few teachers that I really felt like fostered my mind, that engaged my creativity. And so I remember constantly being made to feel like I was an idiot, right? Constantly made to feel like I was a bad person, or just, some kind of, like a fucking moron is probably the most clear way that I can state that. But I don't think that that's actually the case. And I don't think that's the case for any kid that has ADHD. I think the reality is that you're being made to work on things that you cannot see the value in. And because there is this kind of cookie cutter approach for all kids to do the exact same work, there was no system that was really able to teach me, how to be interested in things that I wasn't particularly, interested in the first place, but then to have that kind of work ethic to really create outcomes. I didn't learn that later on until people offered me pathways to channel my mind towards things that I was actually interested in. That's one of the things that weed actually helped me do quite a bit. And it's funny that the summer that I really discovered weed was the summer where I discovered myself, I should say, right? That was the summer where things kind of clicked for me of like, college is 2 years away. Do I really care about that? I was in Boy Scouts at the time. I had put absolutely no effort into Boy Scouts. And then I realized, maybe this Eagle Scout thing is something that I'm interested in and something that I want to pursue. My life as a stoner is where my life as a person with passion really began. I was smoking weed regularly when I became an Eagle Scout, right? I took a year off between high school and going to college. Honestly, I am by no means a person who preaches college is a great path. I think that, if you have a full ride, phenomenal, go for it. If you need technical training and, you want to pursue a career that requires a degree, go for it. But I personally enjoyed college. I studied political science, and it felt like cannabis was one of those things that, of course it allows you to connect with cool people. But it also allowed me to feel like I was really thinking through things, being incredibly present with the things that I was thinking about. And so, that was what I considered it to be an asset, at least for a while. As time went on, though, I started to notice the way that it was draining me. I started to notice the way that it made me feel more tired, right? More fatigued. I had a really difficult time processing challenging human connection when I was high. I absolutely hated social interaction, at least for the first, like 5-6 years of smoking weed, 7 years of smoking weed. And, maybe that's part of coming up as a kid smoking weed. And of course that's not super kosher. And so I was always scared of being judged by adults, being figured out that that's what was going on, that I was high. But that kind of wore off as I got older, and now, in my late 20s, I could, give less of a shit. But the bottom line is, I started to notice that it really didn't make me feel all that good after a while, right? And for those of you that smoke regularly, you'll probably relate to that feeling that you have to smoke again to feel good, right? You smoke, you get the high, but then the come off of the high is physically painful. It's, mentally draining. And so you feel like you've got to smoke again to kind of at least just bring yourself out of that pain. Now, like I said, I'm no expert on neuroscience, but I would assume that a lot of what's happening there is that you are flooding your dopaminergic system with artificial dopamine. Again, why I just think people that are like, you can't get addicted to weed are just like, they're not taking themselves seriously. But it floods your dopaminergic system, and you get that draw out that feels like someone's kind of like squeezing out your brain, right? And so you need to like refill those brain chemicals to make yourself feel good again. And so I have found that While I enjoy the presence, while I enjoy the magic, the struggle of not being meant to feel in control is incredibly difficult, right? The struggle of being made to feel that, I do need these artificial chemicals to feel good. It's just not something that I'm really willing to do anymore. So this is why I make these videos. This is why I'm on this journey of, whether I'm trying to quit weed entirely or whether I'm just kind of going through a long form tea break, don't really know at this point, but it's felt phenomenal cutting back. It's felt phenomenal going to just in the evenings and then just to the evenings every other day. And now on day 3 of totally no THC whatsoever, I feel really, really good. Now there have been struggles, absolutely, right? It has been an experience in, having to figure out how to manage my emotions, having to figure out what to do with the boredom. The boredom is crazy. Just the amount of like sitting on and scrolling on my phone and knowing consciously like, man, I should stop doing this because it doesn't feel good. And that's part of what I'm doing out here making this video today, because I feel like I've had to do everything to kind of get myself to be like, look, we're not just going to sit down and scroll through my phone and get some other kind of artificial dopamine kick, right? This is an opportunity to become one of the best versions of myself. Now, I'm super, super grateful for all of you on YouTube. I've never gotten this much traction on any social media in any form before. And so obviously that's pretty fulfilling, but deeper than that, having conversations with you guys that are also going through the same thing. So that was just, little experience about what it feels like, why I decided to start as a kid, or, what encouraged me to do it. I mean, what encouraged me to do it? Maybe I should kind of explain some of the very specific stories of kind of what happened. So the first time I ever smoked, I was like, man, I was fucking super young. Like it was with my cousins out in the back of their house, and it wasn't that phenomenal. And I don't really remember feeling anything at all. I just remember like, I always thought smoking was cool. And so it was like, oh, I'm smoking, right? But I don't really remember feeling much of anything. Maybe it was just not really weed, who knows? But then the first time I actually got high from it, I told you guys this in one of my last videos, but it was one of my friend's birthdays, and I think we were like 16 years old, and we used to go hang out at this like elementary school to do all kinds of bullshit, like, kind of like fake parkour or whatever it is. But one night it was one of my friend's birthdays, and so we kind of snuck out of his house and went into the woods behind the school. He had like a water bottle gravity bong, and I hit it, and I just remember the euphoria, right? Just automatically, everything was so bright. Everything was so, intense. It was like being in one of those 80s fantasy movies where there's mist everywhere and everything's kind of like glittering, and everybody's got a character behind them, right? And that was so deeply engaging. But again, the real engagement was just how present I was with my thoughts, right? Just how much fantastical narrative I could extrapolate from every single person, right? Every single person was like a character in my movie. And I thought that was phenomenal. And I think at that point I was pretty hooked. And yeah, no doubt the paranoia was insane. I won't even lie. I mean, I remember we smoked again the next morning, and we went to this dude's house up the road, and the paranoia was real. Like I remember feeling so terrified, so anxious, and yet it was so viscerally engaging. And that's probably what, I don't know, it's probably what made me stick with it. And so at that point, it was every single weekend. I looked forward to it. But I remember it wasn't just being high. I mean, and keep in mind, I was only high like once a week on Saturday night or Friday night or something. It made me think deeper about everything else that was going on in my life, my relationship. I had been in a relationship for kind of a long time for somebody at 16 years old. I'd been in a relationship with a young woman since I was like 13. And it was awful. It was so dead. It was so cold. It was so uninteresting. We didn't know each other at all, even though we'd been with each other for that long. And I started to realize that. And I started to kind of not feel engaged by her. And then when, she ended up breaking up with me, And then that's kind of when I got involved with my buddies smoking weed all the time. But as I started smoking consistently, I realized that, that relationship was never really meant to be, right? That we weren't interested in each other. And it was just because my mind was all over the place, right? I was so caught up in my own mind and yet numb at the same time, right? I was a person with a lot of thoughts and yet almost no thoughts at the same time. I had no sense of control. I used to go home 8th, 9th, and then a lot of 10th grade. I would go home after school and watch TV for just hours. And it was because there was nothing going on in my mind. I remember very specifically turning off the TV one time and sitting there and just feeling like I could die and I wouldn't care. It's just like there's so little to do. I'm so deeply uninterested in everything going on in my life that if it all just ended, boom, no problem. But so, I started smoking pretty consistently at that point. And then by the time I was 18, right, and then I graduated high school, that's really when the consistency of smoking on almost every single day came in. Granted, it was at night. Granted, it was with other people. There was a social element of it. But it was providing me that dopamine feedback that I was craving, right? I was a person who would spend just infinite time scrolling on my phone if I did not have presence of mind. And I remember that's what life would feel like a lot of the time in the morning, but especially if I went multiple days without smoking, right? And I think that partially that's what it is, right? It's that THC that gives you that brain boost that you're craving, that you're needing, right? Being a person with lower levels of dopamine, naturally. But like I said, as time goes on, and especially into my late 20s, I started to rely on it so heavily. And this is pretty common with people with ADHD. I read a study recently that said that people with ADHD, about 50% of them struggle with substance abuse at some point in their lives, right? 50%, that's a huge number. And it's because we having ADHD are far more primed to get hooked, to get addicted to drugs than other people otherwise are. And so that's something that I've noticed, right? That, and maybe it's true when people are like, oh, you can't be addicted. It's not that you're addicted to weed. It's just that you're a person that, you crave, you crave dopamine. You crave artificial pleasure release. Maybe it's true. But that doesn't change the fact that it's incredibly difficult to get off of it once you start, right? Once you acknowledge that, hey, there's this external dopamine feedback system, it's incredibly difficult to get rid of that, because then what are you going to do? Are you just going to be miserable all the time? Are you just going to be bored all the time? Now, one of the things that I'm really rediscovering right now in my life is presence, right? Awareness, being able to sit with my thoughts, to be able to practice acknowledging, what am I feeling, right? What am I thinking? And even though I don't know what my intention is right now, does that mean that I need to give into mindless dopamine feedback like scrolling, right? That's something that I was really trying to be present with today. Was I was noticing that every time I didn't really know what's going on, and for those of you that know me and kind of what's going on in my life, I'm a small business owner, and so there is a whole lot of like, what the fuck is going on right now? But it's very easy to just pick your phone up and start scrolling. And I'm sure, whether or not you have ADHD, I'm sure that's kind of a thing that goes across the board. But what I'm practicing is really putting my conscious mind to the forefront, right? Really putting myself in a conscious position and saying, I need to think about what's going on, right? I need to think about what I'm feeling. I need to think about, if I had to decide what I really want, if I had to hold myself deeply accountable to that, what would that be, right? And I cannot just give in to start scrolling, to start doing whatever it is. For a lot of people, it's porn. For a lot of people, it's other substances. For a lot of people, it's toxic behaviors like getting in like trash relationships or whatever it is, hooking up with random people on Tinder or other dating apps and shit. A lot of these practices, a lot of these acts are simply because you're not present, right? You're not aware. And this is what substances do really, really well for us. I'm sure many of you, if you smoke a lot, you can relate to you when you're high, or let's kind of step back. You want nothing to do other than be high. You are so desperate to be high, right? You will give anything, you will do anything just to get some of that sweet, sweet cannabis, roll it up or whatever, dab that shit, whatever your thing is, right? But to get high. But like once you are high, once you are finally high, you want nothing else other than not to be high. I mean, I'm talking immediately. And I felt this so regularly. Between the time of like 22 and 26, almost every single day at the end of the day, I would meet up with my buddy and we would roll up and smoke. And I remember every single time, it got to the point where I would know before I smoked. Like I would know that the second I get high, I'm going to ask myself, man, what the fuck happened? You know, I wanted nothing else than to not be high, right? How did that happen? But I think, again, it's that your brain writes the narrative more powerfully than your conscious mind even can, right? Your conscious mind can know, hey, man, being high kind of sucks. I don't actually want to go get high right now. But there is another voice that's even louder that says, basically, tough shit, bro. Like you might think that you don't want to be high, but you need to be high. You have to go smoke. And so that was an experience that I had for a while, and frankly, an experience that I still have, or right now. And I wouldn't go as far as to say I'm a person that is not a stoner, right? I think I still am technically a weed smoker, and I'll check in with you guys in like 20 days, and you know, if I manage to go that much time without smoking, absolutely, I'm happy to relabel myself. But right now, I'm trying to actively acknowledge that I have an addicted brain, right? And I have to do the work to battle this. Because my ADHD craves that dopamine feedback. It craves that artificial pleasure because it's so difficult for me to create that on my own. I'm obsessed with video games. Like if I play video games, I could sit there and straight play the grindiest video games for hours and hours and hours. And even if I'm tired, even if I physically don't feel good, it's so incredibly hard to tear my mind away from that because it's like it lights my brain up far more than it would for the neurotypical person. And so this is just my experience, right? And I apologize for the rantiest of all videos, for the most repetitive of all videos. I probably should have planned this out a little bit more, or done a little bit more research on brain science before I made this video. But really the bottom line is, they redid the bridge here. Cool. How nice. I just wanted to share my experience and kind of share what I'm going through. And if I could wrap this video up, it really would be with the awareness thing, because the awareness thing is what's helped me the most, right? Every time that I've tried to quit weed in the past, every time that I've, tried to become a person that is more focused, that is more capable of actually creating things, it's been the presence, it's been the awareness, and it's been the practice of asking myself, what are you thinking? What are you feeling right now? And if I can bring that present conscious mind to the forefront, it's going to be so much easier for me to make conscious decisions, even if they are difficult, right? Because it is difficult to pass off on the artificial pleasures, right? It is difficult if you're like, I feel this physical anxiety and I have no idea how to channel it. Frankly, I mean, that's what weed did for me. I hear a lot of people, or I have heard a lot of people over the years explain to me the reason that they stopped smoking weed. They're like, it just made me feel super anxious and paranoid. And I'm like, that's so interesting, because it made me feel that way too. It does make me feel that way too. But for me, what it's doing is it's physicalizing that anxiety and that paranoia into something that's outside of myself, right? Like, I smoked weed, right? There's nothing I can do about this. I'm already high, right? The THC is in my blood. I cannot stop feeling this way. And so it's almost an excuse to be like, you know what? It's fine, right? The anxiety is fine. It's not in your control. It's not because something's wrong with you. It's just happening. So allow it to happen. And so that's what I'm going to be dealing with. And that's probably what you're going to have to deal with if you try to quit, cannabis. But I really struggle with the conversations with people who are totally unwilling to acknowledge this. I watched a YouTube short yesterday from a woman who, she has ADHD, and she was talking about how, weed really helps her. But throughout the video, it's kind of like she's using the weed to do what all of us do, right? To create a space. And in the video, she's talking about how she's never been able to stick with habits. In the video, she writes out this really elaborate evening routine, and she's talking about how it's the 100th time she's instituted an evening routine. And I'm sitting there watching this video, the problem really is that you haven't yet acknowledged that cannabis is not actually helping your ADHD, right? It might momentarily help your ADHD, but long term, it is not actually going to allow you to stick to these habits. Hence why you've rewritten this evening routine many, many times and never actually stuck to it, right? The weed might make you feel reflective, right? It might make you feel like, I want to check in with myself and practice creating a better life for myself. And I'm disappointed with what I've created and not been able to create. And so I'm going to use this current presence to sit down. But the problem becomes long-term. It's momentary, right? You create the plan. You think it's the master plan. You give yourself the accolade that, hey, I did this thing. But then the tiredness kicks in, right? The energy was used. There is no longer self-accountable energy via the cannabis to keep going, to actually institute the routine. And thus, the routine falls by the wayside. The exact same pattern starts over again the next day. And you find that these incredible habits that you become conscious of that you wanted to implement, well, your dopaminergic system has been sapped, right? You no longer have the energy to institute it, and you wake up the next day, fall through the same habits of boredom, scrolling, not being focused, not being alert, until you finally smoke weed again and you have the exact same self-accountability epiphany all over again. The cycle is infinite until you decide to stop the cycle and really use your presence of mind. Now, I'm not saying that you can't accomplish anything while high. Obviously, I'm stealing the words straight from somebody else when I say that's hyperbolic, right? Of course, you can achieve many things while you're high, right? All of us know plenty of people that are accomplished, that are, working jobs, that have started businesses, whatever it is, that they managed to create while they were high, or while they were consistently smoking weed, at very least. But you watching this video probably know that you're limited, right? You probably know that leaning on external dopamine is not the way to actually manifest your goals, or whatever fucking words, phraseology you want to use, right? This is not actually the way to create a long-term pattern of being a person that is able to go out and create what it is that they want without external substances, right? So practicing that presence. And I'll make a long-form video on how to do that. But the bottom line is, being aware. Asking yourself what it is that I'm thinking, what it is that I'm feeling, using that third person perspective. I think the basic tenets of stoicism are a good way to go. I know stoicism is all types of, what's the word? Controversial, that's the word, right? Why was it so hard to come up with that word? Controversial. But I know stoicism is kind of controversial, but for me, it's just practicing that idea of taking a step back, right? Imagining that I am the observer. And if I'm watching this guy, or, if I'm watching myself kind of go through my life, right? What would I say, right? If I was watching myself struggle with boredom, struggle with that desperate need for dopamine feedback, what would I advise myself to do, right? How could I encourage myself to take a deep breath, to relax, and to become intentional? And so, like I said, I'll make a longer form video on attention and awareness, because I do tend to be pretty good at those things. And so if that's something that you want to see, drop a comment below. Thank you for watching this long form rant. I know that I tend not to be super clear all the time, but hey, what can you say? I am who I am. If you're looking for a community of people that are going through the same thing, link to my Discord, totally free. Would love to have you. But peace, my friends. I'm so grateful that you all are here. Hit that follow button, subscribe button on YouTube, I guess. Hit that like button, hit that little notification bell so you know when the videos come out. Take care of yourselves. Peace. Namaste.